Ron Paul is becoming something more important than president, by Jack Hunter. James Antle asked an interesting question last month of the American Conservative. Quote, what would have done more to advance the Christian rights goals in 1988? Pat Robertson somehow seizing the presidential nomination, or his supporters winning party leadership positions all over the country? First, let's remember what the answer undoubtedly would have been from Robertson's supporters in 1988. President Robertson or no one. At that time, many of Robertson's fervent supporters believed that only the famous televangelist, as president, could save America from a continuing descent into moral depravity. Many also believed that without Robertson becoming president, America really didn't have much time left anyway. But imagine what kind of Republican Party a President Pat Robertson would have had to deal with. The GOP in 1988 was certainly more socially conservative than the Democrats, but nothing like the staunch pro-life party it is today. The GOP became more socially conservative due precisely to the movement ignited by Robertson's '88 campaign, with groups like the Christian Coalition and politically active evangelicals helping to define what it meant to be a conservative Republican for the next 25 years. A President Robertson in '88 wouldn't have really had a Republican Party or a Republican Congress he could work with. Today, the GOP far more reflects the party Robertson and his supporters always wanted it to be. Ask Rick Santorum. Let us also remember that this transformation wasn't pretty. Notes Antle, quote, it is easy to forget now that the Robertson forces were viewed as disruptive at the time. They denied delegate slots to longtime party regulars, including sitting congressmen and Republican elected officials. To the extent that party leaders were willing to tolerate them at all, they wished these religious conservatives would simply vote Republican and then go home. Sound familiar? Ron Paul is not going to win the Republican nomination for President of the United States. Dr. Paul knows this too, or as he said this week in a letter to his supporters, quote, due to the smart planning of our campaign and the hard work and diligence of supporters like you, we stand to send nearly 200 bound delegates to the Republican National Convention in Tampa. This number shatters the predictions of the pundits and talking heads and shows the seriousness of our movement. What's more, we will send several hundred additional supporters to Tampa who, while bound to Romney, believe in our ideas of liberty, constitutional government, and a common-sense foreign policy. When it is all said and done, we will likely have as many as 500 supporters as delegates on the convention floor. That is just over 20%. And while this total is not enough to win the nomination, it puts us in a tremendous position to grow our movement and shape the future of the Republican Party. Amen. That Ron Paul will not be president is of little concern to me. I fought as hard as anyone on the campaign to make this happen, but from the very beginning I never considered it the be-all, end-all goal of this campaign and this movement. Why? Because I know that what Ron Paul and what all of us are doing is far more consequential than who actually wins the nomination or the presidency. Some might think I'm kidding. I'm not. Let us re-examine James Antle's initial question. From the perspective of a Pat Robertson supporter, would it have been better for him to become president in '88, or was it more valuable that his people essentially took over the Republican Party? The answer is clear, taking over the Republican Party. A President Pat Robertson without a like-minded party to support him would have been a disaster, thus possibly permanently stunting any hope for a more socially conservative GOP. Imagine President Ron Paul moving into the White House in January 2013. Now imagine that all of the things we care about most, big spending cuts, constitutional fidelity, increasing individual rights, auditing the Federal Reserve, protecting civil liberties, adopting a more prudent foreign policy, imagine that all of these went absolutely nowhere due to a President Paul not having a Republican Party or a Republican Congress willing to support him. True, the President of the United States has enormous power to influence policy and set new standards, but the President alone cannot move an agenda. But with a willing and like-minded party, the President can move mountains. From 1988 to today, the Christian right has defined what it means to be a conservative Republican, often against the party's will. From 2008 to today, no other movement on the American right has done more to redefine what it means to be a conservative Republican than Ron Paul and his movement. During the George W. Bush years, there was zero libertarian principle in the Republican Party. In the last 4 years, and thanks to Ron Paul, the small L libertarian principles that Barry Goldwater promoted and Ronald Reagan considered the very heart of conservatism are finally back, with a vengeance. Ron Paul's movement is taking over the GOP from the grassroots up, and many local and state Republican parties are being staffed and in many cases led by Paul supporters. Every last Paul volunteer who who spent time and effort working hard in their state conventions to secure delegates and the nomination for Ron Paul can know that it is precisely their efforts that are helping to transform the GOP of Bush into the party of Paul. And not only Ron Paul, but his son, Senator Rand Paul, and not only the Pauls, but this is also becoming the Republican Party of Congressman Justin Amash and future Congressman Thomas Massie. This is becoming the Republican Party of the overwhelming number of 18 to 30-year-olds who voted for Ron Paul in this year's Republican primaries far more than any other GOP candidate. This is becoming the party of a new generation of voters who know they'll never see entitlements like Social Security and Medicare, and who also understand that you can't police the world while expecting to have limited government back home. This emerging new electorate understands that true limited government means eschewing both domestic and foreign welfare in ways their voter predecessors never understood. There have been generations of conservative Republicans who've talked about cutting spending. Thanks to Ron Paul, we're seeing the first generation willing to do it. Moving forward, there will be some in our movement who support presumable nominee Mitt Romney. Some might want to vote third party, some might not vote at all. I will not be endorsing anyone. As campaign chairman Jesse Benton has noted, he doesn't expect Ron Paul will be endorsing either. Senator Rand Paul has always said he'll support whoever becomes the Republican nominee. I not only respect his decision, but I actually agree with it, in terms of Senator Paul continuing to build that bridge with the mainstream of the Republican Party that might one day, in the end, give us a President Paul after all. That's the entire point of this campaign, this movement, this commentary, and what we do moving forward. It's not how we get there, it's that we're actually getting there. There's no shame in compromising politically to advance principle, but you can never compromise principle to simply advance politically. Our movement isn't about individuals, but ideas. The difference here is key, and this sometimes confusing philosophy of principled practicality is something our movement will have to learn to understand and employ moving forward. Some will and some won't understand. This is fine because it is inevitable, such is the nature of any real and organic movement. The worst thing about the Republican establishment is that they don't stand for anything. The best thing about the Republican establishment is that they don't stand for anything. Once our movement more fully defines what it means to be a conservative Republican, the establishment will follow. In some ways, they already are. Mainstream Republicans care first and foremost about being part of the winning team. Slowly but surely, it is our philosophy and our Republican brand that is becoming the winning team. The hardcore neoconservatives left standing in our wake might even have to go back to the Democratic Party from whence they came. What Ron Paul is doing right now is far more important than what Mitt Romney or Barack Obama are doing. Ron Paul is changing the Republican Party in a way that promises to bear political fruit for decades to come. Ron Paul 2012 is not only similar to what Pat Robertson had accomplished in 1988, but Barry Goldwater in 1960 and 64, and Ronald Reagan in 76 and 80. We have elections every few years. We have very few revolutions during our lifetime. No doubt the Tampa Convention will be a coronation for Mitt Romney. This is fine. But it will also be the most high-profile demonstration to date to mainstream America that the Republican Party is becoming the party of Ron Paul, and Rand Paul, and Justin Amash, and Thomas Massie, and beyond. It is this movement that stands ready to define what it means to be a conservative Republican for the next 25, 50 years, and then some. Ron Paul will not be president. He will instead go down in history, if not this year, in future years, as the man who redefined what future Republican presidents will be, what the party will be, what the country will be. If we were to disengage from the party right now, simply because we don't like parts of it or who leads it, future presidential candidates will simply be exactly what we have this year. If we stay and continue fighting, they won't be. They'll be our candidates. It all started with Ron Paul, but it doesn't end with Ron Paul. As Dr. Paul said himself almost a year ago, right after he almost won the Iowa straw poll.
I know how the system works, and I know what I'm trying to do, because it's not like I'm just trying to win and get elected. I'm trying to change the course of history.
And he is. We all are. And this is only the beginning.